The alarm hit before I even had my boots laced. 3 short blasts, then a long one. Hull breach, not a drill. I grabbed my kit and ran, my heart already pounding harder than it should for this early in a shift. Kepler Outpost was a mid-sized trading station, home to almost 6,000 people from a dozen different worlds. It was not built for war. It was built for commerce, for handshakes, and cargo manifests, and quiet nights, watching stars drift past thick viewports. Nobody expected an attack. I was wrong about a lot of things that night, but I was most wrong about that. My name is Ethan Hale. I work rescue and recovery, the kind of job where you run toward the fire while everyone else runs away from it. Humans do that a lot, apparently. Other species call us reckless. We call it Tuesday. The corridor outside my bunk was already full of smoke, the kind that stings your eyes and makes your throat feel like sandpaper. Emergency lighting painted everything red. People pushed past me in both directions, some running for escape pods, others just running, because everyone else was. "Hale, report," my captain, Owen Marsh, shouted over the comm in my ear. His voice was steady, but I could hear the strain underneath it. "On my way to Sector 4, I answered, already moving. "What are we looking at?" Enemy vessel dropped out of nowhere. No warning beacon, no identification. They hit the main dock first, then started working their way through the ring. Command thinks it's a raid, not an invasion. They want something specific. Copy that. Survivors? Too many to count and not enough time to count them. Just get people out, Hale. Worry about the rest later. I reached Sector 4 in under 2 minutes, which felt like an hour. The corridor there had partially collapsed. A support beam bent at an angle that made my stomach twist just looking at it. Beyond the wreckage, I could hear something. A voice. Alien, but clear enough that the universal translator in my earpiece caught most of it. "Someone is still in there," I said into the comm, already climbing over broken metal. "Hale, wait for backup." I didn't wait. I never do. That is either my best quality or my worst, depending on who you ask. The gap in the wreckage was narrow, barely wide enough for me to squeeze through sideways. On the other side was a small maintenance room, its far wall bowed outward from an explosion, sparks falling from a ruptured power conduit above. And in the corner, pinned beneath a fallen support strut, was her. I had never seen anyone like her before. Her skin held a faint silver sheen under the emergency lighting, and her eyes, when they opened and found mine, were a deep violet that seemed to catch what little light there was and hold on to it. She wore what looked like formal robes, torn now and stained dark at the shoulder. Even trapped and bleeding, there was something regal about the way she held herself, like pain was an inconvenience rather than a crisis. "Do not just stand there," she said, her voice rough but commanding. "Help me, or leave. Do not waste my remaining time staring." That snapped me out of it. I moved to the strut, pinning her legs, and threw my weight against it. It did not budge. "I need something to lever this," I muttered, scanning the room. A length of pipe, torn from the wall, would have to do. I wedged it under the strut and pushed down with everything I had. My muscles burned. Somewhere above us, the ceiling groaned, a warning that our time was running out fast. "It is not moving," she said, watching me with an expression I could not quite read. Not fear exactly. More like calculation. "It's moving," I grunted, just slowly. The station shuddered again, harder this time, and dust rained down from the ceiling. Whatever had hit us was not done. Somewhere in the distance, I heard another explosion, closer than the last one. "Listen to me," she said, her voice suddenly urgent in a different way. "If you cannot free me in time, you need to leave. Do not die here for a stranger." "Not really in my nature," I answered, throwing my weight against the pipe again. This time something shifted. The strut groaned and lifted just enough. "Pull your legs out, now." She dragged herself free with a sharp intake of breath that told me the movement hurt more than she was willing to show. I got an arm under her and hauled her up, and she was lighter than I expected, though she still leaned heavily against me, her strength clearly spent. "Can you walk?" I asked. "I can try." That was answer enough. I half carried her toward the gap in the wreckage, just as the ceiling behind us gave way completely, collapsing in a roar of metal and sparks, exactly where we had been standing a moment before. The shockwave threw us both forward, and I twisted my body to take the worst of the impact against the debris, shielding her as best I could. For a second, everything went quiet. Not silent, but distant, like my ears were stuffed with cotton. Then the ringing started, sharp and high, and the world came rushing back in all at once. "Are you hurt?" I asked, my voice sounding strange even to me. She did not answer right away. When I looked down, her eyes were fixed on something past my shoulder, and I followed her gaze to see a second collapse starting above the corridor we needed to escape through. There was no time to think, only to move. I pulled her up and half-dragged, half-carried her through the narrowing gap. Debris falling around us in sheets. Something struck my shoulder hard enough to make my vision flash white, but I kept moving, kept her moving, because stopping meant we both stayed under that ceiling forever. We broke into the main corridor just as the maintenance room behind us folded in on itself completely. I did not look back. There was no point. We kept running, choking on smoke, until we reached an emergency shelter pod that had not yet been sealed. I shoved her inside first, then followed, slamming my palm against the emergency seal control. The heavy door hissed shut behind us, cutting off the roar of the collapsing station and replacing it with a strange, ringing silence. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We simply breathed, chests heaving, adrenaline draining out of us in shaking waves. The shelter pod was small, meant for emergencies exactly like this one, stocked with basic supplies, and just enough air filtration to keep us alive until rescue teams cleared a path back to us. She slid down against the wall, finally letting herself feel the pain she had been hiding, one hand pressed to the wound at her shoulder. Blood, dark and almost black in the dim light, seeped between her fingers. "Let me look at that," I said, kneeling beside her, already reaching for the small medical kit strapped to my belt. "It is not the worst wound I have carried," she said, though her voice had lost some of its earlier sharpness. "Doesn't mean you should ignore it." I peeled back the torn fabric at her shoulder carefully, revealing a deep gash that needed more than the basic kit I had, but I did what I could, pressing a compress against it and wrapping it tight enough to slow the bleeding. She watched me work with an intensity that made me feel like I was being studied rather than simply treated. "You did not have to come for me," she said quietly. "Your captain called others back. I heard it on the open channel. I heard that too." And yet, I agreed, tying off the wrap. "Guess I'm stubborn." Something that might have been the ghost of a smile crossed her face, there and gone in an instant. "Stubborn," she repeated, as if testing the word. "That is one way to describe it." Outside the shelter pod, the station continued to shudder with distant impacts. But here, in this small sealed space, there was a strange kind of stillness. I checked the emergency channel on my comm, and found only static, the station's internal network, too damaged to carry a signal through the collapsed sections around us. "We might be here a while," I said, settling back against the opposite wall, "until they clear a path or the shelter's tracking beacon gets picked up." She nodded, wincing slightly as she shifted her weight. Her breathing had grown shallower in the last few minutes, and when I looked closer, I realized the wound had reopened slightly despite the wrap. She was losing more blood than she was letting on. "Hey," I said, moving closer. "Talk to me. Tell me your name at least, since we might be stuck together for a bit." "Kasari," she said, the word coming out slower than before. "Kasari Vaughn. Ethan Hale." I checked her pulse at her wrist, and it felt too fast, too thin. Whatever internal injuries she had were worse than the visible wound suggested. "Kasari, I need you to stay with me, okay? Keep talking if you have to." Her eyes, still that striking violet, found mine, and for the first time since I had pulled her from the wreckage, I saw something raw in them. Not weakness exactly, but the honest fear of someone who understood exactly how close they were to not making it. "My people do not often die among strangers," she said, her voice barely above a whisper now. "There is a custom, when death feels close, and no kin are present to witness it. A way to ensure that whoever stands with you at the end is bound to carry your memory forward, so you are not forgotten in the dark between stars." "You're not going to die," I said firmly, pressing harder against her wound, trying to buy time I was not sure we had. "Not on my watch." She managed something like a laugh, weak and breathless. "Confidence. Humans have plenty of that, it seems. Comes with the job description." Her hand found my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong for someone who looked so close to losing consciousness. "Ethan Hale, she said, testing my name the way I had tested hers. I am sorry for what I am about to do. Before I could ask what she meant, she pulled my arm toward her and, faster than I could react, sank her teeth into the meat of my forearm. I shouted in surprise more than pain, though the pain came quickly after, sharp and startling. It was not a bite meant to injure, not exactly, but it was deliberate, precise, done with a purpose I did not understand in that moment. She held on for only a second or two before releasing me, her energy clearly spent by even that small effort. What was that? I demanded, staring at the mark on my arm, 4 clean punctures already welling with blood. Insurance, she murmured, her eyes fluttering closed, despite her clear effort to stay awake, in case I do not wake up. Kasari. I gripped her shoulders, keeping her upright, keeping her with me. Kasari, stay awake. She did not answer. Her body went slack against mine just as, through the thick wall of the shelter pod, I finally heard the sound I had been waiting for. Cutting tools, working fast, tearing through debris toward us. I held her, pressing what pressure I could against her wound, shouting for the rescue team to hurry, my own arm throbbing where her teeth had broken skin. I did not know yet what that bite meant. I did not know that it would follow me far beyond that shelter pod, far beyond that broken station, out into a galaxy that was about to look at me very differently. All I knew, in that moment, was that I was not letting her go. The door finally tore open, flooding the shelter with harsh work lights and the shouts of my own rescue team. Owen Marsh's face appeared first, relief and shock crossing it in quick succession as he took in the scene. Me holding an unconscious alien noblewoman, blood on both of us, and a mark on my arm that even he seemed to recognize, though I could not understand why his expression shifted so quickly from relief to something like alarm. "Hale," he said carefully, "what did she do to you?" I did not have an answer. Not yet. They loaded Kasari onto a stretcher, her medical team arriving moments later, alien faces pale with a kind of urgency that went beyond simple concern for her wounds. One of them, a healer with sharp eyes and silver markings along her jaw, caught sight of my arm as they hurried past, and she stopped completely, staring at the mark like she had seen a ghost. "By the ancestors," she whispered, loud enough for me to hear even over the chaos around us. "She has claimed him." I did not know what that meant. Not yet. But something in the way every alien in that corridor suddenly turned to look at me told me my life had just changed in ways I was not prepared for, and there was no going back to the way things had been before. I woke up in the station's medical bay, 2 hours later, with a headache, a bandaged arm, and about a dozen questions I did not know how to ask. The lights overhead were softer here, the chaos of the corridors replaced by the quiet hum of medical equipment and the low murmur of voices from the next room over. My uniform had been cut away at the sleeve, and someone had cleaned and properly dressed the wound on my forearm, though the 4 puncture marks were still visible beneath the wrapping, dark against my skin. Owen was sitting in a chair beside my bed, arms crossed, watching me with an expression I had rarely seen on his face before. Worry, yes, but also something more careful, like he was choosing his words before he spoke them. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I got hit by a collapsing ceiling," I said, sitting up slowly. "Because I did. Is she okay, Kasari?" "She's stable." "Her people got her into surgery fast." He paused, glancing at the door before lowering his voice. "Ethan, I need you to tell me exactly what happened in that shelter pod." I told him everything. The collapse, the shelter, the way she had grown weaker as we waited, and finally, the bite. When I got to that part, his expression tightened, and he exhaled slowly through his nose, the way he did when he was trying to figure out how to deliver bad news. "What?" I asked. "Owen, what is it?" "The healers who came in with her medical team," he said carefully. "They've been talking. A lot, and not quietly." "About what?" "About you." Before he could explain further, the door to the medical bay slid open, and the alien healer from earlier stepped inside, the one with the silver markings along her jaw. She looked between Owen and me with an expression that was equal parts professional composure and barely restrained astonishment. "I am Selin Marrow," she said, addressing me directly. "Chief healer to House Vaughn. I need to examine your arm, Ethan Hale, and I need to speak with you about what has happened." "Sure," I said slowly, holding out my arm as she approached. though I'm starting to get the feeling this is about more than stitches. Selin unwrapped the bandage carefully, studying the 4 puncture marks with an intensity that made me distinctly uncomfortable. Whatever she was looking for, she seemed to find it, because her expression shifted from clinical focus to something almost reverent. "Do you know what Our Lady did to you in that shelter pod?" she asked quietly. "No," I admitted. "She said something about insurance. In case she didn't wake up." Selin looked up at me, her violet eyes, so similar to Kasari's, filled with a weight I did not understand. "Among my people," she said slowly, choosing each word with care, "there is an ancient custom, older than most of our written history. When one of our kind believes death is close, and they wish to ensure their memory is not lost to the void, they may perform what we call the binding bite. It is not given lightly, Ethan Hale. It is not given to strangers. It is reserved for those we would choose, in our final moments, to carry a piece of ourselves forward." I felt a strange chill settle over me, despite the warmth of the medical bay. "Carry forward how, exactly?" Selin's gaze did not waver. "The binding bite is not merely a symbol," she said. "Under the law of my people, and recognized across most of civilized space, it marks the beginning of an unbreakable bond. What you would call, in your language, a mating bond." The room went very quiet. "I'm sorry," I said, certain I had misheard her. "A what?" "A mate," Selin repeated, calm, despite the way the words seemed to detonate in the small room. "Lady Kasari Vaughn, heir to House Vaughn, has claimed you as hers, Ethan Hale. Whether either of you intended it or not, whether either of you understand its full weight or not, the bond is formed. It cannot be undone." I stared at her, then at Owen, whose face confirmed that this was not some strange joke or translation error. "That's insane," I said finally. "She was dying. She wasn't thinking clearly. That can't actually count for anything." "I understand this is difficult to accept," Selin said, not unkindly, "but our law does not require clear thinking in the moment of the bite, only intention and completion. And Lady Kasari's intention was clear enough to complete the bond fully." She paused, studying me with something like sympathy. "I would advise you to prepare yourself, Ethan Hale. When House Vaughn's council learns of this, and they will learn of it very soon, your life is about to become considerably more complicated." Outside the medical bay window, I could see figures moving with new purpose along the station's damaged corridors. Alien crew in formal colors I did not recognize, already spreading word of something that, until an hour ago, I had not even known was possible. I looked down at the mark on my arm, 4 small punctures that ached with a dull, persistent throb, and understood, with a sinking feeling, that Selin was right. Whatever had just happened to me was only beginning. Word travels fast when it involves a house heir, and a stranger from a species most of the galaxy still considered new and unpredictable. By the time Grace Whitfield arrived at the medical bay, less than an hour after Selin's explanation, the entire station seemed to already know my name. Grace was Earth's ambassador to this sector, a woman I had met only twice before, both times at formal station functions where I had spent most of the evening standing near the food table, trying not to embarrass myself. She swept into the room now with the kind of controlled urgency that told me she had already heard everything and was still trying to figure out what to do with it. "Ethan Hale," she said, stopping at the foot of my bed. "Tell me this is some kind of misunderstanding." "I wish I could," I said. "What exactly have you heard?" "Enough to have 3 different alien delegations contact my office in the last 30 minutes. She pulled a chair close and sat down, studying me with sharp, calculating eyes. "Selin Marrow's report is already circulating through diplomatic channels. According to House Vaughn's own healer, you are now bonded to their heir under a law that predates most of their recorded history. Do you understand what that means for humanity's standing out here?" "I'm starting to get an idea," I admitted, "though I'd appreciate someone actually explaining it instead of just looking worried about it." Grace exhaled slowly, folding her hands in her lap. "House Vaughn is not some minor trading family, Ethan. They are one of the oldest and most respected houses among the Solinari, Kasari's people. Their alliances stretch across a dozen systems. Their support, or their opposition, can shift the balance of power in this entire sector." She paused. "And their heir has just, by their law, chosen a human as her mate." "She wasn't choosing anything," I said. "She thought she was dying. It was some kind of last resort thing, according to Selen. I understand the circumstances, Grace said, but circumstances rarely matter once law takes hold. What matters now is how the rest of the galaxy interprets this. Some will see it as an insult, a house heir bonded to an outsider from an unproven species. Others will see it as an opportunity, a foothold into House Vaughn's influence through you. She met my eyes directly. Either way, Ethan, you are no longer just a rescue worker. You are a factor in interstellar politics, whether you wanted to be or not. I sat with that for a long moment, the weight of it settling slowly, uncomfortably, into my chest. 2 hours ago, my biggest concern had been finishing a shift without any casualties. Now I was apparently some kind of political variable in a game I did not know the rules to. What happens next? I asked. That depends on House Vaughn's council, Grace said. And on Lady Kasari herself, once she wakes. As if summoned by the mention of her name, the door to the medical bay slid open again, and Selen returned, her expression tighter than before. Lady Kasari is awake, she announced. She is asking for you, Ethan Hale. And I would advise coming quickly. She is not, shall we say, in a receptive mood. I followed Selen through a series of corridors to a private recovery room, Grace close behind me, clearly unwilling to let this development unfold without her present. The room we entered was quiet, dimly lit to ease the strain on Kasari's eyes, and she was sitting up in the bed despite what I assumed were doctor's orders against exactly that. She looked better than she had in the shelter pod. Color returned to her silver-toned skin, though her shoulder was still heavily bandaged beneath a fresh set of robes someone had provided her. Her violet eyes found mine the moment I stepped inside, and whatever softness I had seen in that shelter pod was gone now, replaced by something sharper, more guarded. "Leave us," she said to Selen, though her eyes stayed on me. "My lady, protocol suggests." "Leave us, Selen." The healer bowed slightly and withdrew, though I noticed she did not go far, lingering just outside the door. Grace hesitated at the threshold as well, clearly torn between diplomatic instinct and simple curiosity, before Kasari's sharp glance sent her retreating as well, leaving the two of us alone. "You are angry," I said, once the door had closed. "I am not angry," Kasari said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "I am reconsidering the wisdom of my actions in that shelter pod, which is a very different thing." "You did what you thought you had to do," I said. "Selen explained it. You thought you were dying. That's not something I'm going to hold against you." "That is generous of you," she said, her voice edged with something that was not quite gratitude. "Unfortunately, generosity does not undo consequences. Do you understand what has been set in motion, Ethan Hale? I'm getting a crash course. Then let me fill in what your ambassador surely glossed over," she said, shifting slightly against her pillows, wincing at the movement of her shoulder. "I am heir to House Vaughn. My bonding, whenever and to whomever it occurred, was always going to carry weight far beyond myself. There were already 3 houses positioning their sons and daughters for consideration, hoping to secure an alliance through marriage. All of that has now been thrown into chaos by an act I performed while half delirious from blood loss. So undo it, I said. If it was a mistake, there has to be some way to fix it. Something flickered across her face, there, and gone too quickly for me to name it. There is not, she said quietly. The binding bite, once completed, cannot be undone by either party. It is not a contract to be renegotiated. It is a fact of biology and law intertwined. I have read every text on the subject since I was a child, hoping to understand the traditions I would one day be expected to honor. I know the law better than most healers do, and I am telling you plainly, there is no reversal. The certainty in her voice left little room for argument, though I still felt the need to push against it, some part of me refusing to accept that a single desperate act in a collapsing shelter pod could rewrite the rest of my life without any say from me. So what happens now? I asked. I just become some kind of consort? Prince? I don't even know the right word. Consort is close enough, she said, though the title carries different weight depending on which house recognizes it and which does not. My house will recognize it, because we must, because the law demands it regardless of preference. Other houses may choose to see it as weakness, an opportunity to challenge my position as heir, or worse, to challenge you directly, believing you an easy target compared to a properly trained noble consort. Challenge me how? Kasari's eyes met mine, steady and serious. There are traditions among my people for contesting a bond considered unsuitable, formal challenges before the council, trials of worth. In rarer, more desperate cases, attempts to simply remove the inconvenient party before the bond can be fully recognized. You're saying someone might try to kill me? I am saying it is possible, she said, not softening the truth for my comfort. Unlikely in the immediate term, while my house's protection surrounds you, but possible nonetheless, especially once we reach my homeworld and the wider council learns the details. I let that settle, the strange, surreal weight of it pressing down harder than the collapsed ceiling had in that shelter pod. 12 hours ago, my biggest worry had been a maintenance report I still needed to file. Now I was apparently a target in a political conflict I barely understood, bonded to a woman I had known for less than a day. There's something you should know, Kasari said, her voice quieter now, less guarded than before. I did not choose you carelessly, Ethan Hale. In that moment, facing what I believed was my end, my instincts chose you, because you had already proven something my instincts valued. You came for me when others would not. You fought for me when the outcome was uncertain. Whatever complications this has caused, that part was not a mistake, even if the method was. I did not know how to respond to that, the honesty of it catching me off guard more than any of the political explanations had. Before I could find words, the door slid open again, and Selen stepped back inside, her expression tight with new urgency. My lady, she said, forgive the interruption, but House Cray has already sent formal word. Lord Alden Cray requests immediate audience regarding the bonding. He is already en route to this station. Kasari's expression shifted instantly, the brief softness from a moment ago replaced by something colder, more guarded. Of course he is, she muttered. Who's Alden Cray? I asked. The son of House Cray, Kasari said, and the suitor my father favored above all others for my hand, before circumstances intervened. He will not take this news well, Ethan Hale, and Alden Cray does not lose gracefully. Selen's expression grew grimmer still. There is more, my lady. Preliminary reports from station security suggest the attack on Kepler Outpost may not have been a random raid after all. They are still investigating, but early scans of the enemy vessel's approach vector suggest deliberate targeting of this sector, timed suspiciously close to your scheduled visit. The room went very still. Are you suggesting, Kasari said slowly, that the attack which nearly killed me was not chance? I am suggesting nothing yet, my lady, Selen said carefully. Only that station security has requested a full investigation, and that the timing raises uncomfortable questions. I thought back to the collapsing corridor, the precision of the strikes that had hit the station's main dock first, the maintenance room where I had found her trapped almost as if the collapse had been engineered to happen exactly where she was. A cold weight settled in my stomach, the growing suspicion that whatever had happened on Kepler Outpost was only the opening move of something much larger. If someone deliberately targeted this station to reach you, I said slowly, that means whoever did it either wanted you dead or wanted you exactly where you ended up, bonded to someone they could use against you. Kasari's violet eyes met mine, sharp with the same realization. Or both, she said quietly. A wounded heir and a complicated bond. Either outcome would serve certain ambitions well. Selen shifted uncomfortably by the door. My lady, Lord Alden's vessel will arrive within the hour. What are your instructions? Kasari was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant, calculating in a way that reminded me she had grown up navigating exactly this kind of political danger, even if she had never expected to face it quite like this. Prepare a formal reception, she said finally. And Selen, ensure Ethan Hale is presented properly. If House Cray intends to test the strength of this bond, I would rather they understand immediately that it will not break easily. Selen bowed and hurried out, already calling for attendance through her comm. Kasari turned back to me, something resolute settling over her features, the fear and uncertainty from moments ago folded away beneath practiced composure. I should warn you, she said. Alden Cray will be charming. He will be reasonable and patient, and entirely convincing in his arguments for why this bond should be quietly dissolved for the good of both our houses. Do not trust a word of it. Wasn't planning to trust much of anyone right now, I admitted. The ghost of a smile crossed her face again, brief but real this time. Good instinct, Ethan Hale. You may need it more than you know before this is finished. Outside the recovery room window, I caught sight of a sleek alien vessel, already visible against the starfield, closing in on Kepler Outpost's damaged docking ring with unhurried confidence. Whatever storm had brought Kasari and me together in that collapsing shelter pod, I understood now that it had only been the first of many storms still waiting ahead, and the next one was already arriving, wrapped in charm and patience and the kind of danger that did not announce itself with alarms or explosions, but with something far harder to prepare for. I straightened, ignoring the ache still throbbing faintly in my marked arm, and turned to face whatever was coming next. Alden Cray arrived exactly on time, which somehow made him more unsettling than if he had come late or early. He walked into the station's largest remaining reception hall flanked by 2 attendants, dressed in dark formal robes that made Kasari's earlier torn attire look almost humble by comparison. He was tall, sharp-featured, with the same silver-toned skin as Kasari's people, and a smile that reached his eyes, just enough to seem genuine, without ever quite convincing me it was. Kasari stood beside me, dressed now in fresh robes of deep blue, her injured shoulder hidden beneath careful tailoring, though I could still see the slight stiffness in the way she held herself. Selen hovered nearby, along with 2 of House Vaughn's own guards, their expressions carefully neutral in the way that suggested years of court discipline. "Kasari," Alden said warmly, crossing the hall with unhurried steps. "When I heard the reports from Kepler Outpost, I feared the worst. I am relieved to see you standing, even if the circumstances of your survival are somewhat unusual." "Alden," Kasari replied, her voice carefully polite in a way that felt like armor. "Your concern is noted." His gaze shifted to me, studying me with an intensity that felt like being measured for a suit I had not agreed to wear. "And this must be the human," he said. "Ethan Hale, I believe." "That's right," I said, meeting his eyes without flinching, though something about his composed pleasantness made my instincts prickle with warning. "Remarkable," Alden said, circling slightly, his tone light, but his eyes sharp. "I confess, I did not expect House Vaughn's heir to bond with someone from a species barely 3 decades into interstellar contact. Tell me, Ethan Hale, do you even understand what you have become?" "I'm learning fast," I said. "Turns out I don't have much choice about the timeline." Something flickered behind his composed expression, there and gone, but Kasari caught it too, her posture shifting almost imperceptibly closer to protective. "Say what you came to say, Alden," she said. "We both know this visit is not about concern for my well-being." His smile widened slightly, dropping some of its practiced warmth. "Very well, Kasari. You know as well as I do that this bond, however it occurred, threatens the stability my house and yours have worked toward for 2 generations. Our fathers negotiated an alliance, long before either of us were old enough to understand its weight. A human consort changes everything, and not in ways that benefit either house. The bond was not something I planned, Alden," Kasari said. "It occurred under duress, in a moment I believe to be my last. You cannot fault me for surviving." "I do not fault you for surviving," he said smoothly. "I fault the circumstances that made it necessary. There are options, Kasari. Formal petitions to the Council, precedent for bonds formed under extreme distress being reconsidered under specific conditions. I am simply suggesting we explore them, for the good of both our houses, before this becomes permanent, in ways none of us can undo." "Selen already confirmed there is no reversal," I said, unable to stay quiet any longer. Alden's eyes cut to me, sharper now, the pleasant mask slipping just slightly. "Healers are not always the final authority on matters of law, Ethan Hale. There are older precedents, obscure enough that few outside House Cray's own archives still remember them. I would advise caution before assuming this matter is settled." The threat beneath his words was subtle, but I heard it clearly enough, and judging by the way Kasari's jaw tightened, so did she. "If House Cray wishes to challenge the bond through proper channels," Kasari said coldly, "then do so before the full council, where such matters belong. Do not waste further time attempting to negotiate around me, as though I were a contract clause rather than a person." For a moment, something genuine flashed across Alden's face, irritation perhaps, or wounded pride, quickly smoothed back into practiced calm. "As you wish," he said, inclining his head slightly. "I will bring this before the Council when we reach Solinar Prime. Until then, Kasari, I hope you consider carefully what you are risking." For both yourself and your house." He turned and left, without further ceremony, his attendants falling into step behind him, leaving the reception hall considerably colder in his absence than it had been before he arrived. "That went about as well as I expected," Kasari muttered once the doors had closed behind him. "He's not going to let this go quietly, is he?" I said. "No," she said. "Alden Cray has spent his entire life being told he would one day secure this alliance through marriage. Losing that to circumstances he cannot control, and to a human no less, will not sit well with him, nor with his father, who is considerably less patient than his son pretends to be." Selin approached carefully, her expression grave. "My lady, the council session on Solinar Prime has already been moved forward given these developments. You are expected to return within 3 days, along with Ethan Hale." Kasari nodded slowly, though I could see the weight of it settling over her, the reality that whatever fragile peace remained here on Kepler Outpost would not last much longer. The journey to Solinar Prime took the better part of those 3 days, aboard a sleek House Vaughn vessel that made the station I had spent most of my career on feel small by comparison. I spent much of that time in briefings with Grace Whitfield, who had insisted on accompanying me as Earth's official representative in whatever proceedings awaited, and with Selin, who patiently explained as much of Solinari law and custom as she could fit into the limited time we had. Kasari and I spoke often during those days as well, conversations that started stiff and formal, but gradually loosened into something more honest. I learned she had lost her mother young, raised largely by her uncle Doran Vex, the current head of House Vaughn's council, a man known throughout the sector for his sharp mind and unwavering sense of duty. I learned she had trained as a warrior before her political duties took precedence, that the confidence she carried was not simply performance, but genuinely earned, through years of discipline. In turn, she asked about my life on Earth, about what drove someone to run toward collapsing buildings instead of away from them, and I found myself telling her things I had not shared with many people, about growing up watching disaster response coverage, and deciding early that I wanted to be the kind of person who ran toward the fire, rather than away from it. "Your people are strange," she said one evening, as we stood together near a viewport watching stars streak past. "Reckless in ways that should get you killed, and yet somehow it works more often than it should." "We've had a good teacher," I said. "Necessity mostly." She was quiet for a moment, studying the stars rather than me. "I am sorry," she said eventually, "for what my choice in that shelter pod has cost you already, and what it will likely cost you still. You did not ask for any of this." "No," I agreed. "But I wasn't exactly living some perfect life before this either. Rescue work, long shifts, not much else. This is complicated, sure, but it's not nothing." She glanced at me then, something curious in her expression, like she was reconsidering a conclusion she had already reached about who I was. Before either of us could say more, Selin's voice broke through the moment over the ship's comm, calling us both to prepare for arrival. Solinar Prime was breathtaking, a world of towering silver spires and vast open plazas built to accommodate a species that valued both grandeur and open sky. The council hall where we were received sat at the heart of the capital city, an enormous structure of pale stone and reflective metal that seemed to glow faintly, even in daylight. Doran Vex met us at the hall's entrance, a tall figure with the same violet eyes as Kasari, though his carried decades more weight and calculation behind them. He studied me for a long moment before speaking, his expression unreadable. "So, this is the human my niece has bonded herself to," he said finally. "Ethan Hale. I have heard a great deal about you in a very short time." "Good things, I hope," I said, aiming for something like levity, though his expression did not shift. "Mixed," he said honestly. "Some praise your courage during the rescue. Others question your suitability for the role this bond has thrust upon you. I reserve judgment until I have seen more for myself." "Fair enough," I said. He turned to Kasari, and something softer passed between them, an uncle's concern beneath the political weight of the moment. "The council convenes in 2 days," he said. "House Cray has already filed formal challenge to the bond's legitimacy. You will both need to be prepared to answer it." The 2 days that followed passed in a blur of preparation. Court customs drilled into me by Selin and by Grace. Small details of etiquette that felt overwhelming given how little time I had to absorb them. Kasari remained close throughout, correcting my missteps with patience that surprised me, given how sharp her tongue could be in other contexts. It was during a formal welcoming ceremony, held the evening before the council session, that everything nearly fell apart entirely. The ceremony took place in one of Solinar Prime's grand outdoor plazas. Hundreds of nobles gathered beneath strings of soft lantern light to witness the formal presentation of House Vaughn's heir and her newly bonded mate. Kasari stood at the center of a raised platform, addressing the gathered nobility with the kind of composed authority that reminded me she had been raised for exactly this role. I stood a few steps behind her, uncomfortable in formal robes Selin had insisted I wear, trying not to look as out of place as I felt among the glittering crowd. It was pure instinct, honed by years of rescue work, that made me notice the man near the platform's edge shift his stance in a way that did not match the relaxed posture of everyone around him. I did not have time to think it through logically. I simply moved, closing the distance between us, as his hand emerged from beneath his robes holding something small and sharp, aimed not at me, but past me, toward Kasari. I threw myself between them just as he lunged, catching the strike meant for her across my own shoulder instead, the impact spinning me hard enough to knock us both to the platform floor. Chaos erupted around us instantly, guards surging forward, the crowd scattering with shouts of alarm. The attacker did not get a second attempt. House Vaughn's guards were on him within seconds, wrestling him to the ground as he thrashed against their grip, shouting something in a dialect I did not understand, though the venom in his tone needed no translation. "Ethan!" Kasari's voice cut through the ringing in my ears as she knelt beside me, her hands pressing against the wound at my shoulder, her earlier composure completely shattered. "Stay still, you fool. You are bleeding." "Worth it," I managed, the pain sharp but manageable, nowhere near as bad as it could have been if the blade had found its intended target. "You okay?" "I am unharmed because of you," she said, her voice tight with an emotion I had not heard from her before. "Do not ever do that again." "No promises," I said, and despite the chaos, despite the pain, something in her expression softened just slightly before Selin arrived to pull me toward proper medical attention. The attacker, once questioned, revealed little beyond his own fanatic loyalty to preserving what he called the purity of House Vaughn's bloodline, though Doran Vex's investigators quickly uncovered financial transfers linking him loosely, but unmistakably, to accounts associated with House Cray. "Circumstantial," Doran admitted grimly, once I had been treated and the immediate danger had passed, "but troubling nonetheless. Alden Cray will claim no knowledge, and without direct proof, the council cannot act against his house on suspicion alone. So he tries to have me removed quietly," I said, "and if that fails, he brings his challenge before the council instead." "Precisely," Doran said, "which means tomorrow's session carries even greater weight than before. The council will not simply take Kasari's word, or House Vaughn's, that this bond deserves protection. If you wish to remain recognized as her mate, Ethan Hale, you will need to prove yourself worthy of that recognition, before witnesses who have already decided you are not." "How exactly do I do that?" Doran's expression was grave. "Tomorrow, the council will likely invoke the trial of worth, an ancient tradition reserved for exactly these disputes. It will test you, Ethan Hale, in ways designed specifically to expose weakness. Fail, and the council may rule the bond invalid, regardless of what our own law states, simply on the grounds that you were never fit to hold it." I looked past him to where Kasari stood near the window, her expression distant, worried in a way she had not let herself be in front of the wider court. Whatever tomorrow held, I understood clearly now that it would decide far more than just my own fate, and there was no version of backing away from it that did not cost her everything as well. "Then I guess I'd better be ready," I said. Doran studied me for a long moment, something almost approving flickering behind his careful composure. "We shall see, Ethan Hale," he said quietly. "We shall see." The council chamber on Solinar Prime was unlike anything I had ever stood inside before. A vast circular hall carved from pale stone, its ceiling open to the sky, through a lattice of interlocking beams that let starlight filter down onto rows of seated nobles from every corner of Solinari space. I stood at the center of it, beneath that open sky, feeling smaller than I had felt in a very long time. Doran Vex presided from the raised council seat, flanked by elders from other allied houses, their expressions ranging from curious to openly skeptical as they studied me. Kasari stood nearby, not beside me, since protocol apparently required the one being tested to stand alone, though I could feel her attention on me the entire time, steady and present even from a distance. Alden Cray sat with his father among the gathered nobility, his expression carefully composed, though I caught the faint satisfaction beneath it, the look of a man confident the outcome had already been decided in his favor. "Let it be recorded," Doran announced, his voice carrying easily through the open chamber, "that House Cray has formally challenged the legitimacy of the bond between Lady Kasari Vaughn and the human known as Ethan Hale, on grounds that the bond was formed under duress and involves an individual of unproven worth. As is tradition, this council invokes the trial of worth to settle the matter before all present." Murmurs rippled through the gathered nobility. Beside Doran, an elder I did not recognize rose to explain the trial's structure, and I listened carefully, aware that every detail mattered now more than it ever had before. The trial, I learned, consisted of 3 tests, each designed to examine a different quality Solinari tradition considered essential in a worthy consort. The first tested physical resilience, a demonstration of endurance against hardship. The second tested wisdom, a challenge of judgment before the council itself. The third, and most feared, tested loyalty under pressure, a scenario designed to reveal whether a person's commitment to their bonded partner held firm when tested against personal cost. 3 trials, I repeated, glancing toward Kasari, who gave the barest nod of confirmation. "And I need to pass all 3? "You need only demonstrate worthiness sufficient to convince this council," the elder clarified. "Perfection is not required. Conviction is." The first trial began almost immediately, held in an adjoining arena beneath the open sky. I was given no weapon, no armor, only a simple tunic and the instruction to cross a field littered with obstacles designed to test physical resilience. Everything from narrow rope bridges strung across deep pits to sections requiring raw strength to haul myself over jagged stone barriers. It was grueling in a way that reminded me sharply of the worst training exercises from my early rescue corps days, except here, hundreds of skeptical nobles watched from elevated seating, waiting to see a human falter. I did not have Kasari's natural strength, or the enhanced physiology many Solinari possessed. What I had was stubbornness, and years of training that had taught me to keep moving, even when my body screamed to stop. Halfway through the course, my grip slipped on a stone barrier slick with condensation, and I fell hard onto a padded section below, pain lancing through my already injured shoulder. For a moment, I heard murmurs from the crowd, someone laughing softly, certain the trial was already over. I got back up. It took longer than it should have, my shoulders screaming with every movement, but I finished the course, stumbling across the final marker to a silence that felt heavier than the earlier murmurs had been. Doran's expression remained carefully neutral, but something in his eyes suggested I had at least earned a measure of surprised respect. The second trial came the following day, a formal debate before the council regarding matters of law and judgment, testing whether I possessed the wisdom the role demanded. Alden Cray himself served as my questioner, clearly relishing the opportunity, presenting increasingly complex scenarios drawn from Solinari political history, and demanding my judgment on how each should have been resolved. I did not have his lifetime of study behind me, and I told the council as much plainly, refusing to pretend expertise I did not possess. Instead, I answered each scenario the way I approached every crisis in my own work, breaking it down to its core priorities, weighing costs against outcomes, admitting uncertainty where it existed, rather than bluffing my way through. "You lack our history," Alden said at one point, clearly frustrated by my refusal to be caught in the trap of pretending knowledge I did not have. "How can this council trust judgment built on ignorance of our ways?" "Because judgment isn't about knowing every answer already," I said, meeting his eyes directly. "It's about knowing how to find the right one when it matters, and being honest enough to admit when you don't have it yet. I'd rather stand here and tell your council the truth than dress up a guess as certainty just to look impressive." Something shifted in the gathered nobility at that, a murmur of approval this time rather than doubt, and I caught Doran's expression softening slightly, the barest hint of something like approval crossing his weathered features. The third and final trial was scheduled for the following evening, and it was this one that worried Kasari the most, judging by how quiet she had grown as the day approached. She found me the night before, in the small chamber house Vaughn had provided for my stay, her expression troubled in a way I had not seen from her before. "The loyalty trial is different from the others," she said, sitting across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "It does not test what you know, or how strong you are. It tests what you are willing to sacrifice, and it does so by placing something you value at risk, forcing a choice between that value and your own safety or standing." "What kind of choice?" I asked. "I do not know precisely," she admitted. "The Council alone designs each trial specific to the individual being tested, drawing on what they have observed of that person's priorities throughout the earlier trials. I only know it will not be gentle." I studied her for a long moment, understanding slowly what she was not quite saying directly. "You're worried they'll use you," I said. "Put you at risk somehow, to see if I actually choose to protect you over myself." Her silence was answer enough. "Kasari," I said, "you already know the answer to that question. You saw it at the ceremony." "That was instinct, in a single dangerous moment," she said. "The Council may design something slower, something that costs more than a single act of courage can answer. I do not know what I would do, watching you make that choice knowingly, rather than in the heat of danger." I reached across the small distance between us, and to my surprise, she let me take her hand, her grip tightening around mine, with more force than I expected. "Whatever they design," I said, "I already know what I'll choose. I chose it in that shelter pod before I even understood what any of this meant. That hasn't changed just because I understand it better now." She studied me for a long moment, something vulnerable crossing her expression, before she carefully smoothed it away again, retreating into the composure that court life demanded of her. But her hand did not let go of mine, not for a long while after, and when she finally spoke again, her voice had lost some of its earlier sharpness. "Whatever happens tomorrow, Ethan Hale," she said quietly, "know that I do not regret my choice in that shelter pod. Whatever complications it has caused, I would make it again." The third trial began the following evening, held once more in the open arena beneath a sky now scattered with early stars. The Council had constructed a strange scenario, a simulated emergency, complete with collapsing structures and controlled hazards, designed to mimic real danger without true lethal risk, though the intensity felt unnervingly authentic given my own recent experience with exactly this kind of chaos. Kasari was placed within the simulated structure, along with several other figures I quickly recognized as Solinari volunteers, all trapped behind barriers requiring difficult choices about who to prioritize saving first, given limited time and resources. The trial's true test, I understood almost immediately, was not simply whether I would choose Kasari over the others, but how I would balance that instinct against the broader responsibility a true consort was expected to demonstrate, protecting not just one person, but understanding the wider duty the role carried. I moved through the scenario methodically, drawing on every instinct my rescue training had given me, prioritizing based on actual survivability and need rather than simple emotional preference, even as every instinct screamed to go straight for Kasari first. I trusted that she, more than anyone, would understand exactly why I made the choices I did, even as it meant reaching her last among the simulated victims. When I finally reached her, having successfully guided every other volunteer to safety first, she looked at me with an expression that held no disappointment at all, only quiet understanding. "You made me wait," she said softly, once we were both clear of the simulated hazards. "You'd have done the same," I said, "and been furious with me if I hadn't." The ghost of a smile crossed her face, real and warm despite the exhaustion clear in her features. "Yes," she admitted, "I would have." The Council's verdict came swiftly after that, Doran Vex rising to address the gathered nobility, with an expression that, for the first time since I had met him, held genuine warmth rather than careful neutrality. "This Council recognizes," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the open arena, "that Ethan Hale of Earth has demonstrated resilience, wisdom, and loyalty sufficient to satisfy the ancient trial of worth. House Cray's challenge to the legitimacy of this bond is hereby dismissed." The chamber erupted into a mixture of applause and murmured discussion, though I caught sight of Alden Cray's expression across the arena, tight with barely restrained anger, his father beside him wearing an expression that promised this was far from over despite the Council's ruling. Kasari found my hand again amid the celebration, her grip firm and certain in a way that told me, whatever politics still loomed ahead, Something between us had shifted permanently, settling into ground far more solid than the shelter pod where it had all begun. It was later that night, during the quiet aftermath of celebration, that Selin found us both, with news that stripped away whatever peace the day's victory had briefly offered. "My lady," she said, her expression grave, "House Vaughn's investigators have completed their analysis of the attack on Kepler Outpost. I am afraid the news is troubling." "Tell us," Kasari said, her earlier warmth hardening instantly back into focused attention. "The vessel that attacked the station," Selin said, "was not simply an unaffiliated raider, as initially assumed. Encrypted communications recovered from its wreckage, traced back through a chain of intermediaries, directly to accounts controlled by House Cray. The attack, my lady, was deliberate, and it was aimed specifically at you." The celebratory warmth of the evening drained away instantly, replaced by a cold, focused clarity that I recognized from every crisis I had ever responded to in my career, the moment when everything shifted from uncertain danger to confirmed threat. "Alden," Kasari said quietly, though there was no question in her tone, only certainty settling into place. "The evidence implicates House Cray broadly," Selin said carefully. "Whether Lord Alden himself ordered it, or his father acting independently, remains unclear. But the connection is no longer merely circumstantial." I felt the weight of everything shift around me, the trials I had just passed, suddenly feeling like only the opening act of a much larger conflict, one that had begun the moment that attack ship dropped out of nowhere above Kepler Outpost, and one that clearly was not finished yet. "What happens now?" I asked. Doran Vex, who had arrived quietly during Selin's report, answered before Kasari could. "Now," he said grimly, "House Vaughn brings this evidence before the full council, and prepares for the very real possibility that House Cray, cornered and desperate, may attempt something far more dangerous than a single hired assassin, or a subtle challenge before the council." Kasari's hand found mine again, her grip tight with a resolve I had come to recognize clearly over these past days. "Then we prepare," she said, "together. Outside, beyond the chamber's windows, the stars over Solinar Prime burned steady and distant, indifferent to the storm gathering beneath them, a storm I now understood was only just beginning to break. The evidence went before the full council 3 days later, presented by Doran Vex himself, with the kind of careful precision that left little room for doubt. Encrypted logs, financial transfers, testimony from the captured attacker at the ceremony, all of it pointed toward House Cray, with a clarity that even their strongest allies struggled to dismiss. I sat beside Kasari during the proceedings, watching as Lord Cray, Alden's father, stood before the council and denied every accusation with practiced indignation, insisting his house had been framed by unnamed enemies, seeking to weaken their standing. Alden stood beside him, silent, his expression carefully blank, in a way that told me more than any words could have. "The evidence is compelling, but not conclusive enough for immediate sanction," Doran admitted afterward, once the session had adjourned without a final ruling, the council instead ordering a deeper investigation before any formal judgment against House Cray could be issued. "Lord Cray is skilled at maintaining deniability. This will take time to fully unravel. Time House Cray will use to cover their tracks further," Kasari said grimly, pacing the length of the private chamber we had retreated to. "Or worse, time they will use to attempt something more direct, now that they understand their careful schemes have been exposed." She was right, though none of us fully understood how quickly, or how directly, that danger would arrive. It happened 2 nights later, during what should have been a quiet evening. I had grown used to House Vaughn's guards maintaining a steady presence throughout the estate, where Kasari and I had been staying since the trials concluded, their vigilance a constant, reassuring backdrop to the otherwise strange rhythm of my new life among the stars. I woke to the sound of the estate's alarm system, sharp and immediate, cutting through sleep, before I had even fully processed what was happening. By the time I reached the corridor outside my chamber, House Vaughn guards were already moving with urgent purpose, weapons drawn, shouting coordinates and instructions I only partially understood, through the strain of my translator earpiece, struggling to keep pace with rapid, panicked speech. "Kasari," I said, grabbing the nearest guard by the shoulder. "Where is she?" "Taken," he said, his expression grim beneath the emergency lighting. "A strike team breached the eastern wing minutes ago. Lady Vaughn was moved before we could reach her." Cold, focused clarity settled over me instantly, the same clarity that had guided me through every rescue of my career, cutting through panic and replacing it with pure, urgent purpose. "Show me," I said. The guard hesitated only briefly, before leading me toward the estate's eastern wing, where evidence of the breach was immediately obvious, a section of reinforced wall torn open with precision that suggested professional equipment rather than improvised force. Salen arrived moments later, along with Doran Vex, both their expressions tight with the same urgent fear I felt settling deep in my chest. Tracking signals from her personal comm went dark the moment she was taken, Doran said, studying a tactical display one of his officers had quickly assembled. Whoever did this came prepared, knowing exactly how to avoid immediate pursuit. "House Cray," I said, though it was not really a question. "Almost certainly," Doran agreed, though proving it in time to matter is a different challenge entirely. I studied the tactical display, the layout of the breach, the timing of the strike, and something clicked into place. An instinct born from years of analyzing crisis scenes for exactly this kind of pattern. "This wasn't random," I said. "Whoever planned this knew the estate's security rotations precisely. That's not something outsiders learn overnight." Selen's expression sharpened with sudden realization. "An inside source," she said. "Someone within the estate staff, feeding information to House Cray." "Find them," Doran ordered his officers immediately, though I already suspected time was the one resource we did not have to spare on a lengthy investigation. "We don't have time to interrogate half the household staff," I said. "We need to think like they're thinking. If Alden Cray wanted Kasari dead outright, he'd have done it already. Taking her alive means he wants something else, leverage, or a chance to force some kind of resolution on his own terms." "A forced bonding," Selen said quietly, the realization dawning with visible horror. "If House Cray cannot break the existing bond through legal challenge, they may attempt to force a new one instead, believing that with Kasari isolated and vulnerable, they can compel circumstances that override the original claim." "Can they actually do that?" I asked, cold dread settling deeper into my chest. "Under the strictest interpretation of ancient law, forced bonding is forbidden," Doran said grimly. "But desperate men have twisted law before, and if Alden believes he can present the council with circumstances that appear to satisfy the law's requirements regardless of consent, he may gamble that political pressure will override strict legal scrutiny, especially with a human consort already viewed with skepticism by conservative factions within the council." The picture assembled itself with sickening clarity. This was never simply about eliminating me or contesting the bond through legitimate challenge. It was about controlling Kasari directly, using her own people's ancient traditions as a weapon against her. "Where would they take her?" I asked. "Somewhere private, somewhere they can control the situation fully, before presenting it to the council as a fait accompli." Doran's officers worked quickly, cross-referencing House Cray's known holdings against the limited window of time since the breach, narrowing the possibilities to a private estate roughly 40 minutes away, by fast transport, isolated and defensible. Exactly the kind of location suited to exactly the plan we feared. "I'm going," I said, already moving toward the estate's small armory where House Vaughn's guards had begun preparing gear. "Ethan," Doran said, catching my arm before I could pass. "This is not simple rescue work. House Cray will have guards, defenses, contingencies, prepared for exactly this response." "I don't care," I said, meeting his eyes steadily. "She came for me, in a way, when she chose to trust me in that shelter pod instead of letting go. I'm not sitting here while someone tries to force something on her that she never chose." Something shifted in Doran's expression, respect settling over the last traces of doubt he had clearly still carried about my worthiness for the role fate had thrust upon me. "Then we go together," he said, "properly, with force sufficient to actually succeed, rather than recklessness that gets us both killed before we reach her." The assault force assembled quickly, a tight team of House Vaughn's most trusted guards, along with Selen providing medical support, and Doran leading personally. His own combat training, clearly not diminished despite years spent primarily in political roles. I insisted on joining the forward team despite obvious risk, my knowledge of rescue tactics under pressure proving useful even among warriors far more physically capable than myself. We reached House Cray's private estate, just as the sky began lightening toward dawn, the building's silhouette dark and imposing against the pale horizon. Doran's forces moved with practiced coordination, neutralizing perimeter defenses with efficient, minimal engagement, clearing a path toward the estate's central structure, where intelligence suggested Kasari was being held. I moved with the forward team, adrenaline sharpening every sense the way it always had during the most critical moments of my career, my mind cataloging exits, threats, and pathways with the same focused clarity that had guided me through Kepler outposts' collapsing corridors not so long ago. We found her in a private chamber deep within the estate, guarded by 4 of House Kray's own soldiers, Alden himself present. His composed mask finally cracked into something raw and desperate as our forces breached the chamber's defenses, faster than his contingencies had accounted for. "This changes nothing," Alden said, backing toward Kasari, who stood bound but clearly unharmed, her expression furious rather than afraid. "The Council will see what they need to see, regardless of how this ends." "It's already over, Alden," Doran said, his voice carrying the full weight of House Vaughn's authority, even in this small, tense chamber. "Your soldiers are already secured. Your father's holdings are already being seized pending full investigation. This desperate gambit only confirms every suspicion this council held against your house." Alden's expression cracked further, something wild and cornered replacing the careful composure he had maintained throughout every previous confrontation. His hand moved toward a weapon at his side, and for a moment, the entire chamber held its breath, the situation balanced on a knife's edge that could tip toward violence with a single wrong movement. It was Kasari, despite her bound hands, who moved first, throwing her weight into Alden's side with practiced combat training that reminded me sharply of her warrior upbringing, disrupting his aim just enough for House Vaughn's guards to close the distance and subdue him fully before real harm could occur. I reached her moments later, quickly working through the binds at her wrists while Selin checked her for injuries, finding thankfully only minor bruising rather than anything more serious. "You came," she said, once her hands were free, her voice carrying something between relief and quiet astonishment. "Told you I would," I said, "every time, if it comes to it." She studied me for a long moment, something settling fully into place behind her violet eyes, whatever hesitation or uncertainty had lingered between us, finally dissolving into something clear and unguarded. The aftermath unfolded quickly once we returned to Solinar Prime. Alden Kray's attempted forced bonding, witnessed directly by Doran Vex and confirmed through Selin's medical assessment, along with the mounting evidence connecting House Kray to the original attack on Kepler Outpost, left the Council with no room left for doubt or diplomatic hesitation. House Kray's standing was formally stripped of its highest privileges. Lord Kray and his son, placed under strict council oversight, pending full judgment. Their ambitions toward House Vaughn's alliance ended completely and permanently. The council session that followed, called specifically to address the matter fully, drew a crowd even larger than the one that had witnessed my earlier trials. Doran Vex stood before the gathered nobility, Kasari and I standing together at the center of the chamber, and delivered a ruling that carried far more weight than the earlier trial's simple dismissal of House Kray's challenge. "Let this council formally and fully recognize," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the open chamber, "the bond between Lady Kasari Vaughn, heir to House Vaughn, and Ethan Hale of Earth. Recognized not merely as law demands, but as this council has now witnessed, earned through trial, through loyalty, and through courage demonstrated repeatedly, under genuine threat. Let no house question this bond's legitimacy again, on pain of facing consequences equal to those now facing House Kray." The applause that followed felt different from the earlier trial's mixed reception, warmer, more genuine, carrying the weight of a council that had watched a stranger prove himself, not through political maneuvering, but through consistent, repeated action when it mattered most. Later that evening, after the formal celebrations had finally quieted, I found Kasari alone, on a private balcony, overlooking Solinar Prime's glittering capital, stars bright and clear overhead, in a sky finally free of the storm that had gathered over us since that first collapsing shelter pod. "Quite a journey," I said, joining her at the railing, "from a maintenance room to a full council ruling." "Quite a journey," she agreed, though her expression held something softer than the careful composure she usually maintained in public. I did not expect, when I made that desperate choice in the shelter pod, that it would lead to any of this. Not the trials, not the danger, and certainly not this. This being? She turned to face me fully, her violet eyes steady and clear in the starlight. Genuine partnership, she said quietly. I have spent my entire life understanding bonds as political tools, obligations to be managed, rather than relationships, to be valued for their own sake. What has grown between us these past days feels entirely different from anything I expected when I made that instinctive choice, believing I was simply securing a witness to my final moments. For what it's worth, I said, I didn't exactly expect to end up bonded to alien royalty when I woke up that morning either, but I'm not exactly complaining about how it turned out. The ghost of a smile crossed her face, warmer and more unguarded than any I had seen from her before, and for a moment, standing together beneath Solinar Prime's bright stars, the weight of everything we had survived together felt less like burden and more like foundation, something solid enough to build whatever came next upon. Grace Whitfield found us there sometime later, her expression carrying the particular satisfaction of a diplomat who understood exactly how significant recent events truly were, for humanity's standing among the stars. You understand, she said, joining us at the railing, that House Vaughn's formal recognition of this bond has already sent ripples through half a dozen other sectors, Earth standing among the greater Solinari Alliance, and by extension among their allied houses, has shifted considerably in the span of a single week. Wasn't exactly planning to become a diplomatic asset when I signed up for rescue work, I said. Few great changes announce themselves in advance, Grace said, a rare smile crossing her usually composed features. Other houses are already inquiring about the nature of human bonds, human customs, human worth beyond what limited contact has shown them so far. Whatever began in that shelter pod, Ethan, it has opened a door for humanity that diplomacy alone could not have managed in years of careful negotiation. Kasari's hand found mine again, steady and certain, and I understood, standing there beneath a sky full of strange and beautiful stars, that whatever storms still waited ahead, whatever other houses might yet test the strength of what had been forged between us, I would face them exactly the way I had faced that first collapsing corridor on Kepler Outpost. Without hesitation and without regret. The galaxy had learned my name through chaos and danger, through trials and desperate rescue, through a single instinctive bite in a dying moment that neither of us had planned or fully understood at the time. But standing there with Kasari beside me, her hand warm in mine, I understood clearly that whatever the galaxy called me now, consort, mate, or simply the human who would not let go, I had found something in that shelter pod worth every complication that followed. And somewhere among the stars, other houses were already watching, already wondering what other unexpected bonds the future might hold, already understanding that humanity's arrival among the stars had only just begun to reshape the galaxy in ways none of them had fully anticipated. Our story, it seemed, was only the first of many still waiting to unfold.